Presenting today, we have Rajesh Shriyan, who is the Director of IT Enterprise Data and Analytics at NetApp. So I think that's me done with the intro, Rajesh. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Les. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and I think good evening to wherever you're joining from. My name is Rajesh Shriyan, and I've been with NetApp for about 10 years. During the 10 years, I've seen a huge shift in how we in IT operate, from the good old days of building everything to in the on-prem to that weird interim state that we did where we moved to what was called as ASP hosted model, which I think was the first step towards moving towards cloud. And now to this completely cloud and hybrid kind of model, right? So we have seen that big shift happening inside NetApp IT itself. And as Alex was talking about, from a sales perspective, as you guys are targeting different workloads between cloud and on-prem, what I will try to do is that share with you guys, how does a typical IT organization look at their workload and figure out where do we move different workloads and why, right? Why I think is a key thing. So once you understand the why, you guys can have a very effective conversation with your customers and utilize the language that they understand and help sell more NetApp products. I think that's what I'll try to do. And as I said, I personally like a lot of questions and interactions. And if you need to digest the information and come back, Mark can be your point of contact where you can send him all the questions. I have a dedicated person in my team who does a lot of customer EBCs and those kind of presentations. So he can be accessible to you guys. When you are dealing with the customers and you have a question, you can always reach out back to us, right? So that's the background. Quickly about myself. As I mentioned, been with NetApp for about 10 years, and my key focus is enterprise architecture. Essentially, what that translates to is I figure out where NetApp business is going, and then based upon the NetApp business evolution, we come up with the underlying technology that is required to enable the business, right? A typical IT organization. So for example, when Anthony Lai and team came up with the cloud offering, our team figured out the underlying, the CRM, the CPQ system, the finance system to enable Anthony Lai. So that's our job. As part of that, obviously, we get into really complex conversation around what kind of workloads we can move to cloud, what kind of workloads we should reuse on-prem, and how do we build that whole hybrid cloud strategy? What happens to data? How do you move the data? How are you cost effective? How are you managing the security aspect? And I'll hit upon some of those things. So that's my team's job. And beyond that, I have got other responsibility. So all things data and analytics is something that my team does. And there's a lot of things around integration, which is connecting all the systems through a plumbing is what integration is all about. And my team does some of that activity too, right? So we're talking about the different topic, right? So first, I think we need to level set on cloud itself. So as you guys are in sales and you reach out to the customer, depending upon the persona that you're interacting with, their definition of cloud is going to be very different. If you go and talk to a typical IT organization, they will be talking more about the infrastructure as a service, hosting it on a hyperscaler, utilizing the data center to move the workloads, and those kinds of conversation typically, right? Not always. If you go and engage a business VP or a sales VP at the other side, they are more focused around SaaS and packaged applications. And for them, implementation timeline and adoption of the software is very critical. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if you go to the engineering team, right, in our case, Brad's organization, the typical development, they are more interested in platform as a service because they're building a product and they need the agility of the cloud for them to build the apps quickly, deploy it, be a hyperscaler agnostic kind of requirement. So for them, when you talk about cloud, it's mainly PaaS, right? So if I move from left to right, IT, typically, I'm saying typically, not always, is infrastructure as a service. Business teams are focused more on the SaaS aspect, and the engineering team are typically focused on the PaaS aspect, right? So that's the reason you need to be aware of whom you're talking to so that you have the context. Now, for any organization, and I'll pause after this to see if you have any questions. For any organization, moving to cloud is a very complicated topic, right? There needs to be a strategy. So typically organizations create those strategy for an enterprise. So there has to be a rationale and there has to be a guiding principle. If an enterprise doesn't have that, then it will be all over the place, and you may deploy a solution that's running in the cloud, quote unquote, and it will not give the value that you're looking for. So the first thing is you need to figure out, for a given enterprise, why do I need to move to cloud, right? What is the specific business benefit and business outcome I'm going to get? So if we take the example of what we did in IT for Anthony's organization, Anthony was very clear, hey, I'm building a new business from the ground up. I don't need a lot of the complications of the core selling motion and the core business processes and so on. I want agility. Oh, by the way, we will be introducing a lot of products into the cloud, right? CVS and CVO and so on, Azure NetApp file. I need agility. For me, cost is not a constraint, right? Okay, we said, oh, that makes sense. Then we pick a bunch of solutions for him to enable his operations, right? So SaaS-based solutions. So we knew clearly what the outcome was. If we didn't know the outcome, whatever solution we provided wouldn't have worked out, right? So that is the key thing, is for a given organization, for you guys in sales, you need to understand what is the build strategy, what is the problem the customer is trying to solve. And then based upon that, we can figure out the solution. The second key aspect, which is which everyone should know, is not all applications can go to cloud. There are multiple reasons for that. First thing is that it does not provide business value all the time moving to cloud. A lot of time there are, since most of you guys are from the EU area, EU region, there are a lot of region-specific laws and rules that are very difficult to implement in SaaS. So you need to be aware of those kind of constraints, right? And there are other performance, other things I'll talk about. So what we are saying is that don't target every application to move to cloud, because if you do that, again, you will have a missed expectation in terms of outcome. The other key aspect is that whenever you're thinking about moving to a workload, at least in IT, we want to have the agility to move across multiple cloud options. What that means is that the solution should be agnostic of the hyperscaler and your on-prem solution. I should be able to take a workload, move from on-prem to cloud and across different hyperscalers. Unless and until I have that infrastructure and that kind of thought process, it's going to be very challenging. And every organization needs that maturity to get that. So to understanding the organization's maturity and where they are, and then proposing a solution makes sense. But every IT organization want to move towards a multi-cloud kind of model. The other key thing is on-premise has been redefined. What I mean by that is, gone are those days where you have got this dedicated server, dedicated storage, and you build an application. In this new world of what we call as hybrid cloud strategy, the on-prem data center has to be made and look like cloud, right? For example, auto-scaling as an option, a clustered environment, right? Creating containers and deploying applications through the container kind of model. So your on-prem needs to be redefined, else it's going to be a problem. So that can be a very interesting area from a NetApp perspective, is help the customers as they are figuring out the cloud strategy, figuring out how their on-premise can also be redefined in a cloud-aware, cloud-native kind of technology stack, right? The other key thing, which a lot of time people don't think about as they start their cloud journey and then they figure it out, is you need to look at your workload from a performance and security perspective. This is super important, because a lot of time you might build and deploy an application to the cloud, but the users are unhappy, saying because that cloud application may want to talk to the on-prem application and back and forth, and that might be a very chatty application that is connecting to each other. So if you are not aware of where the latency is going to be, you will be in a world of pain. The other is the security consideration. For example, if you are deploying a solution, right, for federal or USPS or government agencies, there are a lot of security considerations that's required. Typically, over the years, an IT organization builds that in the data center and they have the maturity. Now you take that application and move to cloud, suddenly the cloud provider may not have all those controls and you will be in a lot of trouble, especially with government contracts. So security is something that you should take from the get-go as you start figuring out which workload I'm going to move where. So that's the rationale. So you need to look at some of those aspects. And then from a guiding principle perspective, and I'll pause after this, is every organization needs to have a plan, right? A strategic plan consistent across the enterprise. Marketing cannot have their own strategy. Sales cannot have their own strategy. It should be an enterprise-wide strategy around how am I going to be moving these applications into cloud? And that needs to be a consistent strategy across the organization. And then I talked about the integration pattern. What happens is in a typical IT organization, right? Since you guys are all in sales, you have your Ascend, right? And you got your Salesforce.com for creating cloud opportunity, Ascend for creating core opportunity. And then if you're the core, you guys use CPQ configurator, right? For creating your codes and so on. And then that code gets converts into an order, and then order gets fulfilled and shipped, and then we do the revenue recognition finance. Typical IT system has got a lot of these integrations and connected with each other. So you need to be very careful in figuring out how do I carve out this capability and move it into cloud without causing a massive performance bottleneck and other issues, right? So integration is very critical, understanding what that lay of land looks like. Typically, an IT organization has a view of their architecture. So if you're in sales, getting that view of that architecture will be really helpful. Then you can figure out, hey, I can carve out this workload and move that into the cloud and come with a recommendation. The other aspect is very interesting. Everyone says cloud is cheap. It is cheap initially, but if it's not designed the right way, it becomes super expensive. And we have seen those kind of cases happening already with Adobe. I think a year and a half ago, they figured out that their ramp up was very low because they moved all their data center to, I believe, Amazon. And then over the period of time, the cost becomes so prohibitive that they are moving back to on-prem, right? I think that was about 2 years ago they announced that. So I believe that cloud definitely is cost effective, but you need to be very careful on what workload gets deployed there, right? Versus what workloads remain on-prem from a cost perspective too. And this is the reason the whole NetApp strategy of hybrid cloud strategy is the way to go. Depending upon your cost effectiveness, you can move certain workloads to the cloud. And if you think, hey, the utilization is going way too high, the cost is going up, you should have an ability to move it back to on-prem, which goes back to my previous point, which I was talking about here, is if you define your on-prem to be cloud aware, moving those kind of application back and forth becomes much easier, right? The last one is around exit strategy. Not a lot of people think about that. And that's where NetApp product comes in with our strategy about moving the solutions across back and forth. Our on-tap solution, which can run across any solution, is exit strategy is very critical for IT. And for what we mean by that is certain things we can move, right? For example, the engineering use case I was talking about, the PaaS use case, I can easily move that across different vendors, but SaaS solutions are not that easy. So how do you figure out an exit strategy when, for example, based upon NetApp's relationship or whatever, we don't want to be working with the vendor and we want to get our data out? So figuring those kind of things are very important as you start figuring out the cloud strategy. So those are the key principles that we in IT and most of the IT organization look as we start looking at the cloud versus on-prem. So I'm going to pause here. I shared a lot of information. Any questions, anything that I can double click on? All right. If there aren't any questions, again, as I said, you guys can send offline questions too. So one of the thing, a term that we started using recently and Gartner and everyone is using too, is what we mean by cloud smart strategy, right? So which is cloud is the default option for a lot of IT investment. And again, as I said, cloud is PaaS, IaaS, and SaaS. But a lot of IT organization, they get overwhelmed by cloud first and cloud everything, right? Let me explain what I mean by that. Cloud first meaning I got a business problem, right? Let's say build an application X. So the first step that we do in IT is for solving this business application, what is this business problem? Is this a very common business problem that everyone in the industry is facing? At creating an opportunity, right? Going back to the sales example, everyone out there, whether you're a high tech or not, everyone starts with a lead and an opportunity, right? So we say, well, this is not unique for NetApp and seems like it's a common problem. Let's pick a SaaS solution, right? Now, there can be things that can be very unique for NetApp, right? Territory management, territory assignment, they're very complex in nature. No one has a solution. So in that case, we say, hey, I need to build something custom. And if I need to build something custom, the first thing we do is that, can I build it on a cloud-aware hyperscaler, right? AWS, GCP, with the NetApp solutions and so on. Yes, it makes sense. It meets the regulatory requirement. It meets my security requirement. It meets my performance requirement. Check, check, check. Okay, I'll build it in the cloud. If none of those requirements meet, or one of those requirements does not meet, for example, the application is too chatty, it needs a lot of data from our on-prem systems, it has got some security and regulatory compliance. In that case, we build that application on-prem, and that's how we make the decision, right? So what we mean by that is, cloud first is the right way to do it, but cloud everything is not the way to do it. So that's the new term, cloud smart strategy is what we're talking about. So let me, sorry, did I miss one slide? One second. Yeah. So let me explain. Now we talked about the general strategy, how in NetApp we took an approach of figuring out our own cloud migration. So what we did was, and again, as I was saying, moving to cloud should have a business justification, right? It should, IT justification is all good, the cost and simplification, all that thing makes sense, but it needs to have a business justification. So we understood that a long time ago, saying that if it does not provide business fit and value, let's not even talk about cloud. So what we did was we went and looked around inside NetApp IT, we have about 400 applications, right? So this application help from campaign management, creating leads, creating opportunity, creating codes, orders, all our financial systems. So we take all of those applications, they are about 400 odd applications. Then we took each of those applications, we answered a bunch of questions, and then we tried to look at each of the application to see, does it fit the business, does it meet the business requirement, right? Which is this x-axis, right? Which is business fit and value. Does that meet the business requirement today? And then on the y-axis, we said, for each of those applications, what is their operational and technical risk? Are these applications written 20 years ago for which we don't have any support, right? So when we did that thing, we created this 4-quadrant where each of the applications fit into either tolerate, invest, eliminate, or migrate, right? We call this as time analysis. So what this does is that for applications which are tolerate, right? Meaning the business value is low, the operational risk is low. I'm going to say, I'm going to take those applications, I'm going to containerize them if it makes sense and deploy it onto one of the hyperscalers, right? The eliminate is the one where we are saying this application needs to be shut off, right? So meaning don't even do anything, work with 1 or 2 users who might be logging into the system and just shut the system out because they provide a lot of operational and security risk for NetApp, let's shut it down. The boxes on the right is where the conversation starts getting very interesting, right? So these are migrate, meaning these applications are very critical for NetApp and their operational risk is very high, meaning they were written 10 years ago, 12 years ago, but they're very actively used by the business teams. This can be any kind of application, right? So those are the applications which we are saying we need to migrate. Migrate where? I'll explain that in a minute. Then the top one is the application where the business value is high, and we may have done some recent upgrade where the operational and technology risk is low, but we need to continue to do that investment. Maybe the application needs to be made cloud aware, right? And whatever it may be. So the green boxes that you're saying are the application that we target from a cloud migration perspective, right? Tolerate is put it in a container, deploy it somewhere in AWS and be done with it, provide low maintenance. Invest and migrate is where the decision framework around keep it on-prem or cloud comes in. So any questions for this approach regarding this approach? All right. So when we started looking at those boxes on the right, either invest or migrate, there are different ways of looking at those applications, meaning these are of value to the business. I need to do something about these applications. So one is rehost, right? Which is this application is important for the business, but I don't want to change anything. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take that application, use, let's say, AWS, and deploy it on that infrastructure, right? Which may be CVS and CVO running in the background, CI running in the background. I just want to take that application and lift and shift over there. I don't need auto scaling. I don't need all that complicated stuff. I'm just going to be rehosting them, right? The next application, depending upon the options that we're looking at, either I'm going to be recoding that application to make it cloud aware, or I'm going to rebuild that application utilizing the PaaS capability that the GCP, AWS, and Azure provide. This is where a lot of hard work is required, because imagine an application which is business critical that was written 5 years ago. Now you want to make them cloud aware, right? Like all the auto scaling, the bursty use case, maybe metering kind of use cases. You have to provide all those kind of cloud kind of capability. That means your application needs to be redesigned from the ground up. So this is the most intensive part for any IT organization, is to do that kind of redesign. And that comes in that rebuild kind of bucket, right? So depending upon the application and the usage, we decide it needs to be rebuilt. Now for whether we're rehosting, relinking, or rebuilding, if we have to talk from a NetApp perspective, what we have done is that we have inside NetApp, I think you may have already attended a couple of webinars around Cloud One, which is our strategy of building a hybrid cloud offering, where utilizing Spot and CVS and CVO, we have built a NetApp solution where we can take any application and deploy it to the hyperscaler or on the redefined on-prem data center. So those are the application that falls in that bucket, and we do use Spot. I think it's been already deployed for moving the workloads across different hyperscalers, especially the compute part. Now, those are the three key aspects. Then comes the other side, going back to the very first statement I was making, right? When you talk about cloud, that's IaaS, that's PaaS, and then that's SaaS. Now, SaaS is typically your Salesforce.com, your Workday of the solution, where we look at that green box on the right saying, this business process is very standard, or what's called as COTS, right, which is standard off-the-shelf product like Office 365 and so on. We take those kind of application and replace them with a SaaS solution. Now, in the SaaS space, NetApp doesn't have any product and offering, right? Because SaaS is SaaS, they work in a different space, they work at a very high level of application abstraction, whereas NetApp products are predominantly targeted in the IaaS and the PaaS space, right? But that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation with the SaaS provider. If, for example, if Salesforce.com ever decides to use NetApp product, we will have some angle over there. But right now, NetApp product is very much focused on the IaaS and the PaaS space. So that comes the replace part. So this is where the whole SaaS kind of application comes in. Then the last one is what we call as reimagine, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Reimagine is more about, if you guys are listening to all the things that's happening in the industry, the whole IoT kind of use cases, the edge computing use cases, the blockchain use cases. If those are the innovative technology that IT want to experiment or start on a small scale, that goes into the reimagine category. And typically reimagine applications are all born in the cloud. So those are the typically how we have approached our migrations. We follow those patterns of time. We look at each application, decide whether it's a rehost, recode, rebuild, or replace, and then we move each of those workload accordingly to different solutions. Any questions? All right. So let me talk a little bit about the replace part, since I said NetApp doesn't have a solution. Oops. In this space, what are typically your replace SaaS application, right? As I was saying, there are different categories of very well-defined applications. So Box, Dropbox, Office 365, right? They don't need any configuration. You deploy it and then you start using it, right? So those are commercially off the shelf. That's what COT stands for, products. Then there are unique business specific solutions like your CRM, your HCM, your ERP systems, and I'll talk about the ERP system, why there's a question mark. These applications, you go and swipe your credit card, get your SaaS application, do all the plumbing, and then you can start using them. ERP is very interesting because a lot of NetApp workloads today support ERP and data warehouses. And what we have noticed is that in the last 2 years, a lot of the ERP workloads are moving to SaaS, right? So in the old days, we used to target a lot of customers who have big ERP and data warehouse implementation, because that's where NetApp storage used to run. But what we are noticing is that the ERP vendors, have broke the barrier, and they have come up with a very secure, very stable, very feature-rich ERP solutions in the cloud. And a lot of those workloads are moving from on-prem to the SaaS solutions. So that's the ERP journey. And then anything that doesn't fit in this space is where we go and build our hyperscaler-based NetApp cloud-aware kind of solution and run it across the different hyperscalers. So we call it as the hosted solution. So that's how we're looking at those major applications. Now, again, I will pause after this to see if there are any questions. I talked about Reimagine. Reimagine is your next generation of technologies that is going to be the disruptors, right? AI, I will not call it as a next gen because AI has become very common nowadays. But there is still AI is in its infancy stage. So if you want to experiment with AI, you typically go with a completely cloud-aware solution running in the cloud. Blockchain is another interesting use case where if you want to experiment with blockchain, you go over there. And then again, algorithmic business, digital business, a lot of different buzzwords being coming around. So if you have to evaluate this next-gen technology to see what does that mean for an IT organization, you build everything in the cloud. So you can try it out, test it out. If it doesn't like it, just kill the instance and move on, right? So that's what the Reimagine category is. So currently at NetApp, we don't have any use cases falling in the Reimagine. Most of our applications are our system of record and system of differentiation. What I mean by that is they are your standard CRM systems, your AIQ systems, and so on. And we utilize a combination of cloud and on-prem to meet those workloads. Any questions from the team? I'm not monitoring the chat, so okay, cool. All right, so if there aren't any questions, oops. Hold on, just let me get back. All right, so we talked about a lot about the different aspects around how IT looks and makes decision around moving the different workloads to on-prem or to the cloud, right? Cloud being SaaS and IaaS and PaaS, as I said. We also look at different aspects that helps us make those decisions. So for any cloud migration, there are obviously anything has got pros and cons, right? Everything has pros and cons. So from a cloud migration perspective, there are certain things that you should be keeping an eye out on, right? When you talk about cloud, the key thing that people think about is, well, it's cost effective, it's scalable and elastic, there's self-service, there's on-demand aspect. I can do innovative kind of use cases, right? The Reimagine kind of use cases. So those are some of the key capabilities or benefits that you talk about when you talk about a cloud offering. Now, the potential risk to cloud offering is security is a big issue. Compliance, security and compliance, they sort of go hand in hand. Those are some of the things that change so dynamic. And if your cloud provider does not have those kind of checks, you are in trouble now because you have deployed the application on the cloud. Skills is an important thing, which a lot of people don't think about. Even within NetApp, as we are coming up with a lot of the CBS and CBO and their offering, do we have our sales team trained? Do we have the support team trained? So skills is a common thing, right? Same thing on the IT side too. As we deploy this application into cloud, we need to constantly evaluate, do we have the people to support it? Do we have the people to move these workloads? Do we have monitoring across the on-prem and cloud solution? Is there a unified way to look at all the workloads? So a lot of those capabilities and skill set and tools and technologies are required for your cloud migration. So when we started looking at our own journey for migration and why we wanted cloud, we said, let's understand our outcome, right? So what are the things which is important for NetApp? For us, based upon what we are trying to do inside IT, self-service was important because all the developers were complaining that we have to wait about 3 months plus to get an instance of an Oracle database and a cloud and a compute instance. It's not sustainable. We want to move faster, blah, blah, blah. So self-service was one of the key things for us to build our own cloud strategy, right? AKA Cloud One. We need on-demand features, right? We need this 5 technology stack. Depending upon the requirement, we should be able to create the workload and we should be able to scale the workload accordingly. So that was another ask specific outcome that we were looking for. The other one is around innovation, right? So with our own NetApp coming up with all this hybrid cloud product, we want to utilize those kind of innovative technology to meet and solve business problems. So that was another angle around for us to move towards our own cloud strategy. And the second one, the last but not least, is scalable and elastic, right? I think this term gets misused a lot. Let me explain what I mean by that. So scalable meaning as the application consumption increases, I should be able to add more compute instance without writing a lot of code and be able to meet that demand, right, in an elastic way, right? Elastic meaning unending way. But the reality is that just because a cloud infrastructure provides scalability and elasticity, not every application can get the benefit out of that, which goes back to that arrow I was showing, right? The rehost, redesign, recode. Your application needs to be redesigned from the ground up to be able to utilize the scalability and elasticity that comes into play, right? So that's a big lesson learned for us in IT, and we're still learning and trying to build our next generation application, which are more cloud aware, and so that we can get all these benefits of scalability, elasticity, on demand, and so on. So those are some of the things that typically customers look for when they are thinking about migrating to cloud. They need to identify what is the key outcome which is important for them, and then target it accordingly. So that's where we are, right? And again, any questions on the previous slide around some of the aspects of cloud and why certain customers decides to go to cloud, and what are some of the things that they're looking for? All right. So if there aren't any question, so we talked about our strategy, right? And then the approach that we took with our time analysis, and then some of the benefits that we are looking at, and how do we decide which application needs to move to cloud or remain on-prem. And then from there, now we're slowly not start talking about the future, right? So where the big shift is happening. So one of the most interesting thing that we are noticing is what we call as,
Just as a question, what about multi-cloud strategy?
Yeah. So multi-cloud strategy. So going back, one of the things that we in IT wants to be is we don't want to be vendor locked in, right? So it's very easy to say, but it's very difficult to implement. So I'll give an example, right? If you are building an application on AWS, and if you end up using Redshift, right, which is their database, tomorrow you want to move to GCP, you cannot move that application by dragging and dropping. You have to redesign the application now with the technology on GCP, right, whether it's MongoDB or whatever it may be. So what we try to do is that puts no constraints, right? So multi-cloud strategy is the way to go, but multi-cloud strategy puts a lot of constraints on what you can or cannot do. So for example, if you in your application, if you've got a firewall, right, a software-based firewall, if it is not tied to the Amazon software, the firewall, now you can't move this application into into another hyperscaler. So yes, so multi-cloud strategy is important, including, when I say multi-cloud, including your on-prem data center, right? That's part of the multi-cloud strategy. So it is required, but it needs a lot of maturity. It needs a lot of thoughtful process on your technology things that you're picking up, so that way you're not vendor locked in, because vendor lock-in is the biggest issue when it comes to multi-cloud strategy. But yes, that is part of our strategy. With Cloud One, we are supporting all the 3 hyperscalers, and I got a slide coming up around how that looks like in a minute. And I'll explain the multi-cloud strategy in a little more detail.
Thank you.
Right. So getting back, I think along the same lines, what we are noticing is that there is a big shift happening with what we call as centers of data shifting. What we mean by that is the ERP example that I was talking about. ERP was landlocked on-prem, right? Because people were very nervous. Hey, ERP has got a lot of finance information, a lot of SOX information. We cannot move to SaaS. It needs to be on-prem. But what's happening now is that barrier is broken, and ERP is moving at a very aggressive rate to cloud, and specifically to SaaS, right? And that comes with its own ecosystems and all those things that's migrating. The second big barrier around data shifting is data warehouses, right? So data warehouses is your big repository running on-prem. All the systems that we talked about, they feed the data into data warehouse, and then you do your analytics and all that kind of cool stuff, your data lake, your data marts. all that kind of things were remaining on-prem. But what has happened is that recently that has shifted dramatically to PaaS kind of providers. Snowflake is a great example if you're following them post IPO. There are big vendors coming in that space where they are taking the workload and moving towards a PaaS kind of structure. I believe that Snowflake can run on top of our NetApp offering, but I need to double check on that one. But last I remember, Snowflake can be configured to run on our CVS offering is what I remember. I'm not 100% sure yet. The other one is Azure Synapse is another interesting product that Microsoft has come up with, and that can run on NetApp storage. So those are your massive data warehouses that are moving from on-prem to the PaaS infrastructure. This is where there can be interesting option for NetApp to figure out and come up with a blueprint on what it looks like, right? If you're running NetApp storage in the backend with Azure Synapse running on the top. So that's what we mean by centers of data shifting. So big applications which were landlocked on data center are moving out. The other one I briefly talked about is what we call as micro data centers. So what's happening is that every country like Russia, China, and the big EU, everyone is coming up with their own set of like GDPR kind of rules, right? Saying that, hey, our data, our citizens' data or our business data cannot move to a different location. And we need that data localized within our geos. So micro data centers is a concept that is getting a lot of momentum because every country is asking the same. So what that means is there will be local data centers which will manage your local data, but somehow the business applications will be connecting across all these data centers. There is a lot of new things that needs to get figured out in that space. It's very complex in its nature. Imagine taking a whole stack that runs worldwide business, breaking it down and running in multiple micro data centers based upon the geo rules is going to be extremely complex. Data movement, localization of data, and all that kind of good stuff. The other one is what I call as Composable Sas. So this is the interesting aspect, which is the SaaS providers, they wanted to take over the world. So they built massive SaaS application, very similar to the on-prem packaged application like your ERPs, your CRMs, and so on. But now they're realizing is that it's too expensive for customers to consume. So what they're doing is that they're taking the mega SaaS application, breaking into smaller SaaS application and connecting them together. And then they can sell in each of those as small pieces depending upon your need, right? So that is a big shift that's happening across your Salesforce.com, your Oracle. I'm not sure from a NetApp perspective what it means. Maybe more connectivity through NetApp storage solutions, not sure. But again, the composable SaaS is another big thing that's happening. And then, as I said, on-premises redefined. This is a key concept is in this new world of cloud, when we talk about this multi-cloud, on-prem is also one of the components of the multi-cloud. And the on-prem system needs to be redesigned or redefined to have cloud-like characteristics so that way you can move across this multiple clouds, right? So this is a big industry shift that's happening. And since we are talking about the, your question around multi-cloud and this shift that we are calling as on-prem redefined, this is at a very high level, our own hybrid cloud strategy, right? The code word or the platform name is called as Cloud One. So essentially what we have done is that we took our data center, right, and containerized the application. We utilize NetApp Flash services where it makes sense. We introduced some storage grid solutions for big, large payloads. And I'll talk a little bit about that one. And there are people who can go into detail around the whole storage grid implementation that we got. So what we did was we took our on-prem and made it cloud-like. Then what we did was we also created our own instances, for lack of a better word, across these different hyperscalers, right? With Spot helping us move the workload across different hyperscalers, giving us all the cost effectiveness and so on, running on top of our cloud volumes, right? In each of those hyperscalers, like ANF and so on. So that way, if I'm building an application utilizing the cloud aware kind of technologies, I will be able to move my workload seamlessly across GCP to on-prem to AWS, right? So within our Cloud One, again, going back, we don't do that thing across all application. There are certain applications, as I said, right, like the Tolerate application, if you remember on the left quadrant, I will put that in a container, right? Which is CAS, as we call it, a container as a service. And just like say, hey, this container, this application, not a lot of maintenance required. I'm going to put a container around that one, deploy it into Cloud One. And the Cloud One can be either on-prem, which will make a lot of sense from a cost perspective, or if it makes sense, I can move it into GCP and back without having to worry about any of this thing because it's a container that can be moved around. Then there can be other application, as I was talking about, the green boxes, where I said, hey, this is a custom application. I need to either redesign this or build it brand new. In that case, let me build it in such a way that I should be able to deploy it across these hyperscalers, right? It should be data/storage agnostic. It should be compute agnostic. And I should be able to move between the hyperscaler and on-prem. And because we have redesigned our on-prem to be cloud aware, we can easily do that, right? So that's where we are looking at our own hybrid strategy. Yes, it needs a lot more maturity in an IT function. For example, you need to have a control plane through which you can see where your applications are, right? At a certain point of time, ability to move this application, where is my data, right? And how it's hosted. So all those kinds of tools and technology needs to be built out, and we need to mature that solution. And that's what our whole Cloud One offering is all about. Storage grid, and I'll stop here since there was a question around this to see whether I answer the question. Storage grid is a very interesting use case that we are using inside NetApp. Is essentially our customers, they send large files, which has got some lot of diagnostics kind of information. And as our customers are worldwide, we wanted to come up with an effective solution where we have different storage grid instances running across our different regions, where depending upon the customer's region, it sends the file to the local storage grid instance, and then we do a sync back to the main instance on the US soil for helping with troubleshooting and diagnostic. It's a very completely different architecture that we have built. And if anyone is interested, Mark can set up a dedicated session just talking about our storage grid cool use case that we have built, right? And that's part of our Cloud One offering too. So that's how we are looking at our whole multi-cloud strategy. So I'm going to just pause here and see whether that answered the multi-cloud question, and if there are any other questions from the team.
There's a question. There's an old question on the Q&A, Rajesh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can see it, but it says, how do you position NetApp data fabric capabilities with SaaS offering like Office 365 and Salesforce? It says here, no way to move data from to these SaaS siloed platforms apart backup eventually. Yeah.
I think that's a great question, right? I think again, this is my view, and I will definitely check on Office 365 at least, but let me go back here. Oops. I think this is the slide, I believe. So and if you look at those arrows, right, that you're seeing here, currently our products are predominantly targeted for IaaS and PaaS, right? I think the question that was asked is right on, is we have a solution, we can talk through this one. When it comes to SaaS providers like Salesforce.com and Oracle and other providers and SAP also, they are working at a very different level of application stack where they don't care what the underlying storage and, for that matter, compute is, right? They are more worried about the example I was talking about. Should I use Redshift as a database or not? Now, Redshift underlying might be running on NetApp storage or computed storage. They don't care about that. So SaaS is a space for us where we today don't have a really good way of coming with a solution. Having said that, I think that's one of the things that when I presented to George around the whole cloud strategy, one of the things that we did talk about is around positioning for SaaS customers. And George was saying that he's having a chat with his leadership team to figure out how to get into conversation with SaaS. But you are right on. Salesforce.com, they don't care about compute and storage. They may care about a data hyperscaler, right? Because of the balance of trade and other things. But we don't have a good offering beyond the SaaS backup solution that we introduced, which I'm not sure where we are at this point of time. But SaaS backup is the only thing we can do where we can point to a couple of SaaS instances, get the data, move it into your on-prem, which goes back to my very first thing, which is exit strategy, right? How can I get the data back from SaaS provider is where we play in, but beyond that, we have a gap in the SaaS space. Office 365, I think there are very interesting use cases over there. Maybe Mark, let's follow up on that question with our team and see where does our product fit in the Office 365 space. I think there are some interesting use cases out there. But in general, the answer is for SaaS, we don't have a very good offering and very difficult to chat with our customers around how NetApp storage comes into the SaaS space.
I hope this answers your question, Marco, but you can always send us an email and then Rajesh will be able to analyze and send back a reply. Rajesh, there's also a question on the chat from Ian Garland. I don't know if you can see it.
Mm-hmm. I'm just reading through that one, yep.
All right, okay.
I understand how you can have multi-cloud volume strategy, but what about the application? There is a coupling between the two, and this seems to be too often forgotten. These will also need to move. Yep, Ian, that's right on. A lot of time, people don't understand the dependency between the compute and the storage aspect. And when we are talking about, let me get to that slide. When we are talking about the migration and move across hyperscaler, that's one of the things which is very critical and it's part of our strategy, which goes back to the topic that I was talking about, is picking your technology stack so that way it's easier to move those data along with your compute, right? So for example, what I mean by that is your compute can be your Java-based application or your microservices Spring Boot-based application. And then your database can be something like a MongoDB or other SQL databases. So when you are moving this application, if you are keeping to those kind of paradigms, you should be able to easily move it across on-prem and cloud. The moment you start making it more sticky, right, utilizing the specific locations like a cloud volume location or so on, it becomes very challenging to move the application. So you're right. I think you need to look at both apps and your data together, right? Or compute and storage together as you're building your next gen architecture. So that way you can move across the hyperscaler. That's part of our design principles. And that's where we pick very selectively what technology we can be able to move across the hyperscalers so that both the compute and the storage can move together with them. Otherwise, you can't have a situation where your compute is on AWS and your cloud volume is on GCP and they can talk. It cannot work like that. So it has to move together, both the application as well as the storage/data. So it all depends upon your application design principles and how you design this cloud over applications. All right, let me see if there is any other questions. All right, thanks, Ian. And again, if there are more deep dive questions that you guys and gals have, send me an email. I got a lot of experts and architects in my team who work across a lot of these use cases. They can go into a lot more detail and get you very, very specific answers to your questions. Right? If you think I haven't answered enough on your question or is not detailed enough, let us know, send us an email, and then I'll connect you with the experts and they can go into the next level of details. All right, I'm looking at the clock. We have about 10 minutes left. So I think for me, and again, we can open up for more questions. So this is my key takeaway slide. Getting back is, let's be aware as you guys are engaging the customer that cloud smart is the way to go. Not every workload can be migrated to cloud. It needs to be workload driven. What we mean by that is be aware of the customer's security aspect, right? Security sensitivity and compliance aspect. Understand the customer's performance needs. Understand the customer's integration and how their applications are connected. Once you understand that, then we can come up with this kind of solution like the Cloud One based framework that we have created. We can recommend those kind of solutions to our customers. The key thing to note is that moving to cloud is just not an IT decision. A lot of time people think cloud means it's technology, the CEOs make the decision. A lot of cloud decisions are dependent upon what the business needs and the outcomes are. The other aspect is that you guys can take a look at the framework that we created, migrating to cloud, right? And if you want to have a very focused conversation with your customers, understanding that application rationalization, like our time thing that I talked about, the 4 quadrant, having a view of that kind of customer's landscape will help you have a targeted conversation saying, hey, these are the kind of application that we think you can deploy to the PaaS solution or the IaaS solution. And this is how the NetApp products can help you, give you the agility and so on. And you need to be talking about, like we said, I won't talk too much about the cloud aware capabilities, that I think more about the bits and bytes, but that can be a really great framework to have the same kind of language the customers understand, and then targeting those kind of workloads to migrate to cloud, right? So again, I'm going to pause here. I think those were my key callouts. I know I went through a couple of the slides in detail. If I'm more interested in getting some questions, or what are some of the things that you guys are hearing when you are talking to your customers?
So any more questions, guys, on this?
And yeah, and then again, you have all our email addresses. You can always send us follow-up questions as you are thinking it through. The other question is that, does some of the things that we talked about today, does that resonate with some of you as you are dealing with some of these workloads, especially helping the customer figure out which workloads remain on-prem, which workloads go to the cloud? Does this kind of framework and this kind of conversation help in that regard? All right, I'm assuming silence means people think it's it makes sense.
Or maybe it's Thursday.
Everyone is ready for the Friday beer.
You get a reply from Joy saying, yes, it was useful.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, and again, like a lot of these things are at a high level, right? I think there are two ways of conversation, right? One is understanding what the customer needs and figuring out a framework and a language to have a conversation. Once we get them engaged and we get to the next level of details of migration and all that kind of stuff. So I think that was my intent, is to share how, if you in the sales team come and talk to me, I'm going to be talking along that language saying, hey, why should I move this application? What is the business benefit? What I'm going to gain? What I'm going to tell my business user, right? After doing all this auto scaling and elasticity and all that kind of stuff, what is the business user going to get, right? So we always think along that lines, and then that translates us into all this migration and other conversation. I'm looking at the chat. I think, yes, beer is the code word. All right, Mark and Alice, anything else that you guys want to chat about? I think we have a couple more minutes left.
Mark, anything from you? Ian Scott, it all makes a lot of sense from a partner perspective. It working out how we become a trusted advisor while still being able to make money as a business. Okay.
Yep, agree. I think that's where I think it's gonna be, right? I think the next generation of IT, right? I'm talking more about IT. I'm not talking about the product and engineering side, right? Because they have very similar but a little bit different kind of pain points that they deal with. At least on IT, gone are those days where I talk about in terms of storage and compute and so on. We assume those things are by default available. Our conversations are more about business outcome, value realization, and so on. So we are more and more focused over that. That doesn't mean in IT people don't do those kind of things. You still need people with that kind of infrastructure expertise to build your cloud aware on-prem data center and so on. But most of the IT organization are focused around that business outcome and business value. And utilizing that kind of language gets them onto the table. And once they're at the table, then you guys can do your magic of selling. But having that kind of language and conversation goes a long way.
Okay, I think I think if there are no more questions, anything else, Rajesh?
I think it was again. I was looking forward to the presentation because I want to see what we can do to help all of you guys, right? To do more sale, get a better customer, long-term relationship. And as I said, if you guys are dealing with a customer where you need someone to come and talk, and again, Mark is your point of contact, and through Mark, he reaches out to me and so on. So reach out to him, and we can get on a call with the customer and help you guys out. So to help level set some of these things, share our own journey and experience. So that way it can help you guys out too, right? So again, Mark will be a point of contact for any other customer engagements that you might need help with.
Okay. I think we can close the call now, Rajesh. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. You've heard it from Rajesh. You can contact him directly, and via Mark or myself. And if you need any help with what's been discussed today, I mean, we will be happy to help. So yeah, thank you very much, Rajesh, for very interesting presentation today.
All right, perfect. All right, thanks everyone.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
All right, okay, take care. Bye.